Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the GBSN Cross-Border Coffee Break on designing the best tech MBA for the fourth industrial revolution. My name is Nicole Zephyrin. I'm the communications officer here at GBSN. Today we have Mr. Wim Naudé, the former dean of Maastricht School of Management and visiting professor at RWTH Aachen University. Here is a brief agenda for today's webinar presentation. I'll begin with a very brief slide about GBSN, and then we'll hand it over to Mr. Naudé to go through his presentation. At the end, we'll do a 5 to 10 minute Q&A, depending on time. So here is how you can submit a question on Zoom. So you can submit a question throughout the entire webinar presentation without disrupting Mr. Naudé. To do that, you go to your toolbar, your black toolbar at the bottom or the right-hand side of your Zoom screen, click the Q&A button, and this box will pop up. So enter your question here. If you'd like to send your question anonymously, click this button right here, and then click send. All the questions will be put in a queue that will be accessed at the end during the Q&A portion. So the Global Business School Network. GBSN is a network of business schools, 73 top business schools in 40 countries, all aimed at working at our mission, which is to improve access to quality management education for the developing world. Our work falls under three umbrellas. We foster a network of partnerships, we promote best practice within the management education realm, and we administer capacity building programs in various sectors. For more information on membership and our activities, visit gbsn.org. And now I'll hand it over to Mr. Naudé.
Yes, thank you very much, Nicole, and welcome to all the viewers this morning at this cross-border coffee break. I want to talk about how we can design or improve the Tech MBA for the fourth industrial revolution. And this is part of my broader interest in the question, namely, how can business schools be more impactful in their education and research, given all these new opportunities and risks that technological changes associated with the fourth industrial revolution brings with it. Now, one way is that business schools can think about redesigning the content, the approach, and the accessibility to what is their flagship program, the Master of Business Administration, or MBA. And my interest in this is for two reasons. First, I'm a development economist, and I've been advising policymakers for decades now on how to make better impact on development outcomes. Then some 6 years ago, I became the dean of a business school. And in addition to ensuring that the school joined the Global Business School Network, I obtained first-hand experience of the nature, the role, and the potential impact that business school education can have on global development challenges. Now I'm on a research sabbatical, which I spent at RWTH Aachen University in Germany and Said Business School at Oxford University. And I'm sitting down, hopefully in a publication, in a good book, about how I think MBA programs can be made more relevant, more interesting, and more impactful. And through this webinar this morning, I wish to share some of my initial ideas. And being initial ideas, I hence hope to elicit some good feedback and suggestions from you. I proceed, of course, on the assumption that everybody today has sufficient knowledge about what an MBA degree consists of. Now, in the slides that you can see on the screen, the first bullet on that slide indicates that the MBA of today is largely an outcome of the previous industrial revolution. The MBA as it typically is offered today, and of course there are many variants and changes and perturbations, but generally as the MBA is offered today, it's the outcome of the previous industrialization or the previous industrial revolution, which saw the USA industrialize during the late 19th and the 20th centuries. And during this period of industrialization, the USA needed to improve its labor productivity and its firms started to globalize. In 1911, a scholar with the name of F.W. Taylor wrote a book entitled The Principles of Scientific Management, which aimed to bring the most recent methods of science to bear on the question of how managers can raise the productivity of their workers. This book was hugely influential over the next century on management education. And we see this today, this influence, in the fact that aspects such as human resource management, leadership, operational planning, and accounting are really the core courses of any MBA program. Then also the second thing after the need for labor productivity was the fact that after the Second World War, especially after the Second World War, USA's multinational companies conquered the world. And those elsewhere tried to follow suit. There's an interesting article in the 28th January edition of The Economist, 2018, where The Economist described this going global and the influence of the USA's multinational corporations as follows, and I quote, McDonald's and KFC embodied an idea that would become incredibly powerful. Global firms run by global managers and owned by global shareholders should sell products to global customers. For a long time, their planet-straddling model was as hot, crisp, and Moorish as their fries. The likes of IBM, McDonald's, Ford, H&M, Infosys, Lenovo, and Honda have been the benchmark for managers. So hence, with this benchmark for companies, they needed managers who could manage large corporations, who can span the globe, who could understand international business, and moreover conquer new markets, overcome the competition, and raise the substantial finance to scale their businesses globally. So we see this need for global corporate management reflected today in the MBA's curriculum's strong focus on things like strategy and branding, marketing, international business, logistic and supply chain management, and finance. All aspects of knowledge that you need to run a global business. Now, on the one hand, this focus on getting workers to be more productive, and on the second hand, this focus of conquering global markets and running big global corporations, that seem to have worked well for a time. But it would seem like maybe in the last decade, maybe even the last 2 or 3 decades, this model that links the needs of a particular phase in industrial development of the West with the MBA is running out of steam. For instance, both labor productivity, the concern of Taylor, and the globalization of firms, the McDonald's model, are running into difficulties in the West. For instance, productivity growth, corporate profits, entrepreneurial startups, and economic growth are all in decline in the West. And there's even a name for it called secular stagnation. And more firms are also reshoring and redoubling their efforts and focus on local and regional markets. To put it a bit bluntly, over the last 2 decades in the West, labor productivity growth has continued to decline, entrepreneurship has declined, innovation has become less effective, inequality has skyrocketed. And all of this has happened despite the fact that enrollments in the MBA program has grown tremendously. Is this perhaps telling us, as Nancy Adler put it, that the options and approaches that worked well in the 20th century no longer work as well, if at all, today? So in slide 2, that you have in front of you now, I elaborate a little bit the second point that I want to make. And this is that as the MBA was influenced by the old or the previous industrial revolution, the world is experiencing now, there's great agreement that something is happening, which is called the fourth industrial revolution. And just as, and I want to argue that just as the earlier industrial revolution shaped the contents and approach of the MBA, so the new industrial revolution inevitably will result in a different kind of MBA. And I think this is what we need to think about. How need the MBA to be adjusted and improved to be more relevant for this new industrial revolution? Now, the fourth industrial revolution is a revolution in the sense that it is, as that slide indicates, driven by the convergence of various new technologies. It's not just that there's one specific technology that's specifically impactful or exponential. We see a number of technologies, specifically infotech, especially the ICT and digital revolution, biotech, as well as nanotech, converging and making possible new ways of consuming, new ways of producing, and new ways of distributing goods and services. And what that slide also like to show you with those graphs, the 4 graphs on the left-hand side of the slide, is that many of these technologies are impacting along an exponential curve, right? So for instance, the cost of computing and the cost of sequencing the human genome has gone down exponentially. And this decrease in cost and increase in accessibility is having a huge impact. Now, for instance, it's been calculated recently that the value of applications on, a $700 mobile phone today would have costed more than 32 million back in 1985. So we see absolutely huge gains that's been brought about by exponential technological change. Now, with this type of cheaper connectivity, cheaper communications, the number of connected devices, internet users, and digital content creation has really skyrocketed exponentially. And this is especially since 2007, when I think there was a tipping point in terms of the volumes of activity through the internet. Now, this connectivity, as the next slide indicates to us, this connectivity is making possible the fourth industrial revolution and makes it also different from previous industrial revolutions. So in the first industrial revolution was really driven by steam, the second by electricity, the third by the computer, and now we have basically connectivity. And this connectivity allows us, as the slide indicates, to do two main things, especially as far as industrial side is concerned, and that is to digitize and automate our economies. So, for instance, with digitalization, we have created huge amounts of data. And this huge amount of data is now allowing us to run machine learning programs, algorithms to create artificial intelligences that we see now really becoming like a general purpose technology throughout the economy. We also see on the other hand that automation is allowing robots and cobots and chatbots to be able to interact and help humans in the work that they are doing. And in between this digitization and automation, we have the technologies of the Internet of Things, all the sensors that we see around us today, the 3D and 4D printing, so we can have smart materials and we can digitally design things and we can print them wherever we want to. We don't need economies of scale anymore for production. And we see digital platforms that creates buyer and seller markets. And that provides value whether you have 100 users or 1 billion users. The platforms allow scalability of activity and hence also much bigger impact. Now, this connectivity and the digitization and automation allows us to have products and tools that can be smart. And I mean by smart is that they can interact with tools and products and with consumers. And the most important thing perhaps of this interaction now of our products and our tools and our consumers and our producers is that our systems can learn and they can improve by doing so. And this has huge ramifications in terms of disrupting business models and disrupting society more generally. So in the next slide, I start with this disruption that I've just mentioned. So this slide indicates the disruptions to business models, and we all read and experience how business models are being disrupted on a daily basis. From mass customization to hyper-personalization, the on-demand economy to the sharing economy, crowdfunding, cryptocurrencies, from autonomous vehicles to predictive innovation, e-science, all of these are nowadays part of the course in business. And businesses who cannot adapt to these changing models will, I think, increasingly find it difficult to survive. In fact, the most valuable companies today in the world are all digital platform companies, and they use and invest intensively in new technologies such as artificial intelligence. At least the top 5 valuable companies based on market valuation at the moment are digital platform companies. Now, the scale and impact of this disruption is expected to be huge. As I indicate on that slide on the right-hand side, and this is based on a recent report by McKinsey Global Company, who calculated that the impact of the fourth industrial revolution will be 3,000 times larger than the impact of the first industrial revolution. And if we think that is nothing, remember that the first industrial revolution fundamentally transformed the world in ways never imagined before. I mean, to quote Joel Mooker on this, the first industrial revolution unleashed a phenomenon never before even remotely experienced by any society. And we are in for 3,000 times the impact, if this is correct in the assessment made. So it's not only in the slide, the business models that are being disrupted, it's also basically society. With this huge impact is the whole of society, the fiber of society that's affected. And the next slide goes a little bit deeper into the impact and disruption on society. I mean, there's a lot of fantastic progress that the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution will allow us, but there's also a price to pay for this progress. And I think this is also where, you know, how businesses deal with it, how governments deal with it in policy. We need somehow to also make sure that we somehow address the costs of this progress, and also make sure that the benefits of the progress is actually also fairly and equally distributed throughout society in a way that also makes progress in itself sustainable. But these are questions that I will come to later, because I think they should be fundamentally part of the approach in any new MBA. So if you look at the slide there, all the societal disruptions, there are both things that are positive and things that are negative. Amongst the optimists, there are, for instance, the growing secular religion of transhumanism, who believe, to quote from Mark O'Connell's 2016 book, To Be a Robot, where he writes that the promise of technology is that we can and should eradicate aging as a cause of death, that we can and should use technology to augment our bodies and our minds, that we can and should merge with machines, remaking ourselves finally in the image of our own higher ideals. But it's not all optimism, as the transhumanists believe. There are also risk and large margins of uncertainty. We should remember that all technological innovation is by its very nature a process that has uncertain and unpredictable outcomes. Many questions are being asked that reflect this uncertainty. For instance, will robots take all our jobs? Will a super intelligent AI emerge and eradicate or enslave humanity? Will the new wealth accrue to only a few winner-take-all firms and entrepreneurial superstars? Will cyber terrorists shut down entire industries or remotely hijack our cars and planes? Will we all end up in a surveillance state without privacy? Will cyber currencies and virtual citizenship undo the modern nation state, which you should remember is itself a product of the first industrial revolution? These are but some of the questions that reflect the growing disruption of society. And while I have used one slide to summarize the disruption of business models, and I've used one slide to summarize the disruption of society, in reality, the two are intertwined. For instance, extended human lifespans can come about, for instance, through new business models in healthcare. For instance, business models that emphasize prediction and prevention more, and emphasizes and uses the personalization of medications, and uses crowdsourced innovation to make medical breakthroughs. But these same business models will also lead to better biological weapons, designer babies, biohacking, and the possible collapse of insurance markets. And thus, more than ever in the fourth industrial revolution, managers and entrepreneurs need to know that their decisions will impact not only on themselves or their organizations, but possibly reverberate more quickly and decisively through broader society. In other words, have much quicker a global impact. These technologies are very much in the nature of general purpose technologies, and they will not leave a sector of the economy or society untouched. The problem, however, is that for any individual manager or CEO or company shareholders, it's becoming more and more intricate and complex to even think about what the implications of their actions will be. If the invention of a new technology for, say, visualization of learners, or visualization of our core content in the programs, how that will impact and how that will be applied outside of that specific context that it has been designed for. So these are very important problems. Core to this problem of knowing the future and fast changes and the impact which your innovation and technology will have on the rest of society is the fact that we are all so much connected. And when you have all this connection between millions and billions of economic agents throughout the system, you have producers, consumers, workers, households, firms, governments, name it, and millions and billions who are interacting all the time. The critical aspect becomes coordination. How do you coordinate to get anything done and to find out what your impact will be, to actually tailor impacts in a beneficial way? And this coordination, I want to argue, and this is important, I think, also for how we structure the type of learning that goes into the MBA. This coordination needs to do two things, or there's two types of coordination that we need. The first is we need a lot of coordination in regulation and in insurance. Because we are facing a technological shock to society, we need somehow to be able to regulate it, and we also need to provide insurance or protection against bad outcomes. But we also, secondly, need to coordinate in terms of complementary investments to all the tech investments that are taking place in society. So let me talk about these two things: coordination of regulation and insurance, and coordination in terms of complementary investment. So first, coordination in regulation and insurance is needed because new technologies, as we see, for instance, with artificial intelligence, tend to be more dangerous when they are new, often because they are unfamiliar to the users, but also because they are still full of technical bugs. They still need to be debugged. And that may take some time, right? And to take an example of this kind of like time that it takes to debug and learn a new technology, take the invention of electricity. So like artificial intelligence today, electricity was the big general purpose technology of the late 19th century. And in the years immediately after the introduction of electricity, we found that quite large numbers of people were by accident electrocuted. And in subsequent years, we saw actually the proportion of people being electrocuted fell by at least 90%. And this was due to two things: information and education, telling people how to handle electricity. And secondly, improvements in complementary technologies, such as, for instance, ground fault circuit interrupters, which made electricity much safer than the first electricity were. And I think just the same thing applies, for instance, to artificial intelligence today. We need to inform people about what it is, how it works, how it learns, what kind of data is good and what kind of data is not so good for AI. But we also need to have, technologies that check the AI that are in which they are embedded. We need for AI also a kind of ground fault circuit interrupter. Right? We also saw a similar experience follow the introduction of the motor vehicle in the 20th century. So if you look at the number of US motor vehicle deaths per 100,000 population, the peak of deaths were in the early 1930s. Thereafter, following increased safety awareness, better testing, more safety features in vehicles and on roads, in other words, again, complementary technologies, the rate of fatalities in motor vehicle accidents in the US dropped significantly, despite the fact that there's more cars on the road and the number of miles that they are driving has been increasing manifold. Right? So we need this kind of regulation. We need a complementary type of innovations to be in place, right? And it's actually predicted that the more we put complementary technologies and infrastructures in place, the more impactful over time the fourth industrial revolution will come. And many scholars predict that we've actually not yet fully experienced even the full impact on economic growth, on productivity, etc. In this case. So right, I've dealt with the nature of the fourth industrial revolution, and I've emphasized the importance of coordination and of sensitivity towards the impact of decisions that companies and governments can make. So now I want to argue that this type of knowledge we need to take into consideration in designing or redesigning an MBA program. So in the next slide, I put up a basic framework, a basic scheme, as you will, for indicating that an MBA for the fourth industrial revolution need to have at least 3 parts, right? And the first part there, the vision or the vision and the mission, is basically to indicate that, more than ever, having a mission-driven company is very important, but also, as I will emphasize, a vision-driven individual, and which was actually more important. Now, I would like to have all MBA participants start off by knowing what's driving them. Why do they get up in the morning? What motivates them? Do they have a why? Simon Sinek pointed out very eloquently that managers and entrepreneurs and employees in organizations can all very well describe what they are doing every day. But once you start asking them why they are doing that, many of them don't really have a good answer. And You may say to me, well, of course, it's staple diet in any MBA to talk about vision and mission, etc., and measuring whether we are moving towards that. And that is true to an extent, but I think it's even more important for the fourth industrial revolution. And it's also more important on the individual level, that individuals have their own missions in life, what they want to accomplish. Because as Thomas Friedman indicated that, maybe in the near future, it's not going to be the digital technologies where there's going to be a gap, like a digital gap, but it's going to be a motivational gap, that, some people are really going to be motivated and driven to use the technologies and the opportunities they create in a very forceful and productive fashion, but that many people will probably not be able to have that motivation or that vision where they need to go to. And it's not so easy to find that motivation or that vision and mission in life that can be very distinct, that can be, a big vision that can motivate people, that can drive positive change in the world. And this is where an MBA can help in honing those type of skills and providing an environment where individuals can think and work to develop that motivation that they need. Yeah, this is very, very important. Now, if one way that I would also start that, of course, many times I encounter participants in MBA programs who feel that they really want to make a difference in this world, and they feel that they have more sense in their life and meaning in their life if they can address issues like poverty, and they can help other people. And how does one get that into a company? How does one create a vehicle or organization around yourself to do that? That's a very important question, I think, for the next century. And I would say as a starting point is the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, this is very clear and very helpful. In 2015, the world agreed on 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and also in the end of 2015, the Paris Agreement to address climate change. And these create lots of whys, lots of reasons for existence, a lot of meaning in life to be able to work on these development goals. And these development goals are also great business opportunities. Peter Diamandis has said that the world's biggest problems are also the world's biggest opportunities. So very important to start off with the vision or the why of any endeavor or any life that one has to live. The second part of the MBA would be, as indicated there in the second circle on the right side of this slide, is to learn participants the how, the tools and the tricks, the tools, the tricks, the technologies. And I have, I have like this tools and tricks way to describe it, because I really think that the toolkit of the modern manager is vastly expanded, and it's expanding rapidly, every year. I think that F.W. Taylor, who, as we recall, in 1911 wanted to make management scientific, I think he would be very pleased by the scientific advances made in recent years in understanding human behavior. And I think that maybe the MBA is still lagging behind, teaching our students the most recent scientific advances, in neurosciences, in behavioral sciences, in physics, etc. Because there are a rich amount of tools, techniques, and understanding from this cutting edge of science that can make management and entrepreneurship more scientific than they are, and can help to better decisions, better optimization of how to reach our goals. And in fact, I believe that we should perhaps move a little bit away from the traditional focus on the subjects as we have it, but rather take an approach to say that if it's science and scientific approach to dealing with questions, then let's think what we can take from behavioral science, for instance, or from the science of strategy, or from data science, or from organizational science or ecosystem design science. So for instance, in behavioral science, we have fields like evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, neuromarketing, neuroeconomics, all of which gives us very useful insights into how people behave. In the science of strategy, we have game theory, which has developed into a very powerful tool to look at human decision making. In data science, I think both software, hardware areas, machine learning, probability theory should be part of the core staple of the entrepreneurial and MBA curriculum. And these approaches are, by the way, very generalist. So I think that's precisely reflecting the age-old spirit of the MBA to focus on general knowledge, which people can apply in all organizations, in all contexts. And of course, they can be applied to create new approaches to marketing, new approaches to finance, to human resource management, leadership, etc. I think especially that areas like marketing and finance are basically, in a way, moving to the data divisions of companies, becoming very much data-driven, driven by algorithms, AI, etc., going to change completely the way I think that that's going to be dealt with in future. So I'm basically arguing, ladies and gentlemen, that in teaching these tools and tricks, that in the MBA curriculum we should maybe have some disregard for the old disciplinary boundaries. Now finally, and this is where I have the third round piece there on the slides, the Euro. Here it is, and I use the word Euro there because Euro is something that comes from stories, right? And I think the telling of stories are very important. It's also, good business advice. When you talk about, at many of the startup accelerators, if you pitch a new idea, they say that it's more the story that you can tell, that you can convince people about, than the spreadsheet numbers that you may be able to throw at a potential investor. So how can you convince people about what you need to do? You need to be able to be persuasive. And in terms of telling stories, there is nothing like a hero to feature in a story. Every story needs a hero. And this hero is the person who takes the MBA, the person who wants to make something with his or her life. And I think too much in the past, the MBA has been built around the needs of the firm. What do companies want as workers? Let's give our MBA graduates those kind of skills. And I think companies can come and go. I mean, it's no big problem if a company fails. The important thing is, where does the skills and the people go? What do they do? So there will be churning, and in an efficient and a competitive economy, there will be many companies entering and exiting the market. But we should be more concerned, in my view, about the life trajectory of careers, of human resources, human capital, because it becomes more important and even more expensive over time to train and educate our workforce to be able to make a contribution to society. And hence, that for me is a more natural emphasis that the MBA should have on. And this means that as part of the hero of the story, the MBA for the fourth industrial revolution need to strengthen the personal resilience and the contentment of the individual manager or entrepreneur. And this is because the highly uncertain and even experimental world will bring many failures with it. It will bring many obstacles with it. It will bring unexpected resistance, conflict, challenges. And the danger is that the individual manager will just opt out. We know that burnout, stress, depression are already taking a huge toll on society, estimated at almost 500-600 billion euros in Europe alone. So the third part of the MBA is to prevent this from happening. In fact, I even want to say that it's not only to prevent stress and mental disease, but to promote eustress, in other words, flourishing and human happiness. And the question then that you're going to ask me is, how can this, perhaps the most elusive goal, be reached? Can an MBA actually contribute to making a person's life worth living and to achieve a meaningful life? I think the potential gains are worth the effort. I think that is essentially that's the future of education, and I think that was also the original purpose of education, to make a person's life worth living, to help people to achieve a meaningful life. And I think with these technologies that we are seeing around us, now we have maybe the real opportunity to be the first generation who can really make this make this come real for many more people in the world. So I would design such a module, the Euro module of the MBA. I would design around 3 pillars, around ideas, around actions, and around tools. So the first of this pillar of ideas would involve philosophy. And I think this is important. The point that I want to make is really philosophy needs to go back into the MBA program. Our MBAs need to be philosophers of sorts. It is interesting just to note that many people today in the fast-changing tech industry, in hotspots like Silicon Valley and elsewhere, are increasingly turning to Stoicism, a form of Western Buddhism, one can say, wherein it's important to establish control over one's own thoughts and feelings. And this is seen as being very important to be resilient and to be able to take the knocks of life and continue. I'm not advocating one particular viewpoint, but just indicating as an example that one can learn a lot from philosophers and about their ideas, and that their ideas are indeed quite relevant for the high-tech world in which we are living. Now, this is the one pillar. The second pillar is action. So once you have the ideas about how to live your life, how to be a good leader, how to be a good manager, you need to put actions to the ideas. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that people who do good things to other people, who show their gratitude, that they do have better physical and mental health as well. Of course, these type of actions need you to have routines. You should not just leave it for accident, but you really need to develop your habits, your routines. And neuroscience today tells us that meditation and exercise are very good tools to help you in terms of taking the right actions, understanding what you want to do, and getting a good perspective in terms of how to go forward in your business or in your personal life. Now, the third pillar then, apart from the first pillar being ideas, the second actions, the third one is tools. And there's a lot of new technologies and new knowledge that can help MBA students to perform better in their careers. So there are myriads of health apps. You can just you can Google health apps, and you will find lots of apps that can check your blood pressure, your fitness, how much you have walked every day, your sleep patterns. You have even smart beds nowadays that will track your sleep patterns, that will know just before you are going to wake up, etc. So you can use all of these things much better. There's also huge advances in pharmaceuticals, in health supplements, and in training methods to make people have more robust and exciting and passionate lives in good health. So this is the key of the MBA. These three circles, which around I would design an MBA. Of course, a lot of detail needs to be filled in there that goes beyond this one webinar. But I very much like to hear from you. If you have any ideas or any suggestions or any comments to make on this, would be much appreciated. I come now to my last slide for this cross-border coffee break. And this is the final aspect, is to say that we have looked at, I've talked about the content and the approach of the MBA, but it's also the question of what's the approach? How do we design it? How do we deliver it? How do we make it accessible? Because we have to remember that at the moment, MBAs are very expensive programs. And I think that we still need to face up to the challenge to disrupt the business model on which the MBA has become entrenched. Because it's not only the cost of the MBA that is high, but one can also argue that given all these challenges of declining productivity, declining profits, that maybe even the emphasis of the MBA has become irrelevant. Now, looking at the cost of that, remember I showed earlier these graphs of falling costs that is associated with technological progress. Well, we still have to see the same in education. In education, things have actually become more expensive. So I just had a look at the fees or the price indexes in the United States. So if you take the price index for fees for higher education in the US, it increased by more than 1,000% between 1978 and 2015, which was actually 5 times faster than the average price of goods and services. So it just becomes more and more expensive. And what's also puzzling is that at the same time you have had much more and more people taking an MBA. And at the same time you have seen CEO salaries in the US and elsewhere just skyrocketing in relation to workers' salaries, which is one of the reasons contributing to higher income inequality. And one would have thought with more supply of MBAs into the market for management that actually the price or the wage would actually decrease, not increase. So somehow we need to think whether in the bigger picture, the MBA, its pricing, its accessibility, and its impact on CEO pay levels, whether that is all as it should be. And in many cases, I also in my experience, I've talked to a lot of deans who have introduced online education as a way to think about maybe making it more accessible to create a global classroom. But many of those schools indicate to me that, they actually underestimated the cost of online education. And sometimes the technology even make the MBA degree more expensive and more complex. This is also in schools. I know that I've experimented with virtual reality, virtual classrooms, etc. It's very nice. It sounds very sexy, but it's very expensive, and it makes the MBA even more subject to price increases. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, that maybe it's time that we think about disrupting the MBA. Maybe it should make way for a new type of modular lifelong learning initiative, and a new way of improving access. Now, I just use an example. I'm not saying this is how everything should be done, but I think this is interesting to show that there is some interesting things happening. So there's, for instance, the Lambda School. It's a business that was started up through Y Combinator in Silicon Valley. And they've recently offered a 30-week program in software engineering and machine learning. And it costs exactly nothing, no initial cost. You can join it from anywhere, and you don't have to pay anything. You only pay once you have a job, and only once your job pays you more than $50,000 a year. Then you start paying back based on your income share. So it means that you have basically huge access. So it's an interesting example. I think we need more of these type of solutions. I think we also need to think about, with the new industrial revolution, technologies are making, mass customization, hyper-personalization is becoming the buzzwords. I think we need to make business school education much more personalized, that people can, over their whole lifetime, learn at their own pace, learn what they need to be learning, and be able to have the classroom come to them instead of them going to the classroom and track their learning. So it's a huge challenge out there. I think we need to strive for the Moore's law of education, in other words, doubling the quality every 2 years and halving the price every 2 years. I think a Moore's law of education would be great. And of course, I want to issue that as maybe a challenge to all the new MBA graduates out there who may want to take up the challenge. Let's see if we can accomplish that in our generation. On this note, I want to thank you for joining this cross-border coffee break, and wish you all the best, and appreciate always your comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, and now we move into our Q&A portion. So I see a few questions that have come in here. Okay, in the fourth industrial revolution, is it far too early to say that the car or air travel will prove to be less important than the sequencing of the human genome or synthetic biology?
Less important.
Yes.
I think so. I think that, in terms of, those disruptive forces that I indicated on my slide, I really think that biotech is going to be one of the most impactful technologies that that we will experience. I think much more so than the info tech revolution. I think that's going to increase lifespans dramatically. It's going to increase health. It's going to increase, of course, also changes in demography. It's going to raise huge ethical questions, legal questions, issues of privacy. I think it's really going to be huge, and I think we are on the cusp of it. And I don't think we always appreciate how much almost unregulated research is being conducted. There are, for instance, I think more than 3,000 or 4,000 biohackers in the world working away in laboratories, some in their garages, some in more formal laboratories, but there is really a lot of innovation and research in the topic. So I think it will be really big.
From your research, which business schools or regions have been most proactive in preparing for the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, in my experience, it has really been the areas that are at the forefront of the fourth industrial revolution, right? So you have the United States, you have the Silicon Valley model since 2005 and 2007. It's been accompanied by a kind of like an entrepreneurial revolution as well. You also see that in Europe, in countries like Germany, which is also the birthplace of what they call Industry 4.0, which is an explicit strategy by the German government. And then, of course, there is a huge amount happening in China as well. China has very explicit strategies of promoting high tech, of wanting to become a leading nation in artificial intelligence. And that is, as we speak, being used also in the education field very intensively.
Good. Okay. You mentioned earlier the problems of inequality, yet in the talk, your talk did not dive deep into detail to address this. If anything, the elite nature of the MBA seems to exacerbate these inequalities by harnessing ideas that will only be applicable for particular parts of the world with high levels of capital. Would a real disruption to the MBA be about detaching from ideas of exploitative business relations as inhumane practices?
Yes, it's a very important question, very good question. I think that is really at the heart of what I also was saying when I talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I also referred at the end of my talk to the increases in inequality and the rising CO2 wage gap. The point is that the technology can have an impact on raising inequality, and we have to be careful for that. We have to be careful that it's not a small elite that benefits from technology. And that's why I'm also saying that regulation is very important, and complementary investment. So take, for instance, many developing countries, say countries in Africa, where complementary investments like fiber optic cables, broadband, etc., is a prerequisite for being able to take part in the digital economy. So this type of investment should take place to be able to ensure that these countries do not fall behind and fall behind even further to the countries at the tech frontier. But it's also the mission and the orientation of firms that we create, and the way that we impart those type of motivations to the MBA graduates. They should come out of these programs with a positive desire to make the world a better place, not only for the environmental sustainability, which is important, but also the social sustainability, right? Just as too much CO2 is going to contribute to rising temperatures, so increasing inequality is going to give rise to social disruption and so forth. And it's not sustainable. So I think that's a very important point, and I really think that we should be really giving a lot of attention to these type of possible things that can go wrong in the tech economy.
Okay, I have two questions here that can kind of be combined. Okay, so how would the Tech-MBA impact business schools in developing countries? And obviously, is there a chance to connect developing world schools with this phenomena?
Yes. Well, this is my hope. I really want to design and work on a tech MBA that's relevant for wherever you are in the world. And I want to emphasize as well that the tech MBA is not an MBA with a little appendix or a specialization in tech, but it percolates through all of the approaches in the MBA. And that makes it really, for me, important to be able to spread that type of MBA through the developing world, because the fundamental challenge in the developing world is to find the new technology and to absorb the new technology and to make sure the new technology is distributed and disseminated throughout society as quickly as possible. Because, I mean, think about the previous question, the gaps that we already see can just be exacerbated between the rich countries and the poor countries, between the existing digital gap that exists, if there is not a rapid diffusion of technology. The technology to developing countries not only need to diffuse, but it sometimes also need to be adapted to local circumstances. So you really need to have a vigorous entrepreneurial ecosystem, innovation system that can support the recognition and the adoption of this type of technology. And I hope that the Tech MBA will make a contribution in this regard as well. Maybe one of the biggest contributions could be. Now, of course, in our hyper-connected world, the great thing is that these type of initiatives can be done in collaboration. I think the Global Business School Network is providing that type of platform whereby all business schools can exchange best practices, can learn from one another in terms of curriculum, and don't have to start off from scratch in terms of designing their education programs. And this is exactly, for me, another argument why the education costs should come down over time and not increase.
Wonderful. Last question. So is your proposed model completely online, or what type of plan do you have for a blended learning format?
Yes, I think that that's partly what I mentioned at the end of my talk as well. You know, how do we make sure that it's accessible, and there's such a great need for you know, advanced management education for CEOs and decision makers to lead companies in the tech world and in tech upgrading. That I think that, you know, we need to roll out these type of programs fast, and especially if I think about emerging and developing regions, Latin America, Africa, especially large parts of the Middle East, are actually underserved in terms of business education, management education. And so, of course, we need to use all the tools. We need to use online, we need to use face-to-face, we need to use blended learning. I think increasingly, you know, an MBA will probably become maybe a 20 or 30-year program that one follows throughout one's life and continually updates that. And that if that is the case, then is where I mentioned, you know, the benefit of having hyper-personalized education, that you can learn on your own tempo, that you can have the courses tailor-made for you. I know, for instance, that big online education platforms like Coursera is already employing artificial intelligence to be able to tailor-make executive education programs that can exactly tell you know, the companies what their employees are learning during these courses. What are they learning? What are they not learning? What are they good at? So that they can actually have a better fit within the company and with their own aptitudes, etc. So I think we are only at like they say, at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is possible if we start to scale up and integrate and start using smart technologies to help us in doing this. And then I think in the end, we will have really a proliferation of education approaches and models, really in a hyper-personalized fashion.
Awesome. That is our final question. So thank you so much, Mr. Naudé, for your presentation, taking the time to give this. Thank you everyone for joining from all over the world. Following the webinar, I will provide a recording of this presentation as well as a copy of his PowerPoint presentation, and as well as a written document outlining the questions and answers from the Q&A portion. So thank you again, and I wish everyone a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.